Ladies and gentlemen, most people walk through life thinking power only comes from dominance, aggression, or control. But there's a rare kind of strength most overlook, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand attention, but instead feels deeply, sees beyond the surface, and moves with purpose. That strength is empathy. And let me tell you something most won't. Empathy isn't weakness. It's not soft. It's not naive. Empathy in its highest form is a superpower. But not everyone with empathy is a super empath. That's a different breed. That's someone who not only feels the weight of other people's emotions, but also understands them, channels them, and can transmute pain into power. Now, here's where the dynamic shifts. A narcissist senses energy like a predator smells fear. They gravitate toward empaths because it's like finding an endless well of attention, validation, and emotional labor. They drain, manipulate, gaslight, all under the illusion of charm or woundedness. But a super empath, they're not just a source, they're a mirror. They don't just absorb, they reflect. And when a narcissist looks into that reflection, they don't see the version of themselves they carefully constructed. They see the truth. And the truth, it terrifies them. See, most people think a narcissist can only be stopped with confrontation, with revenge, with equal toxicity. But you don't defeat darkness by becoming darker. You defeat it by turning on the light. The super empath is that light. They expose the game not by shouting, but by knowing, by seeing the patterns and refusing to play anymore. That's the real destruction, not in breaking the narcissist, but in refusing to let them continue the cycle. What makes a super empath powerful isn't just sensitivity, it's awareness, it's discernment. It's the ability to feel pain and still choose peace, to feel betrayal and still choose boundaries, to feel manipulated and still choose clarity. That kind of emotional intelligence isn't common. It's forged through fire. It's earned through tears, sleepless nights, moments of what's wrong with me, only to rise with the revelation that nothing was ever wrong with you. You were just surrounded by people who benefited from your confusion. And when that clarity hits, the whole game changes. The narcissist starts to lose control. Why? Because their power was never real. It was borrowed. Borrowed from your belief in them, your hope in their potential, your willingness to carry more than your share. But the moment you stop carrying what isn't yours, the moment you stop explaining your heart to someone committed to misunderstanding it, that's when they crumble, because they were never strong. They just knew how to make you doubt your own strength. This is why only a super empath can destroy a narcissist. Not by attacking them, not by seeking revenge, but by evolving, by rising, by healing, by choosing truth, even when it hurts, by choosing boundaries, even when it's lonely, because that decision to honor yourself is the ultimate act of destruction in a narcissist world. You become untouchable. You become sovereign. And suddenly their manipulation bounces off like rubber bullets because you no longer need their validation. You no longer fall for the illusion. You no longer shrink to make them feel tall. You stand, you shine, you move forward, not out of spite, but out of freedom. And in that freedom is a power they can't touch, can't imitate, and certainly can't control. Because the one thing a narcissist fears most isn't exposure, it's irrelevance. And when the super empath walks away, fully aware, fully healed, and fully in their light, the narcissist fades into the background, powerless, because the source they once fed from is no longer available. And that is the quiet destruction. That is the divine reversal. That is what ends the cycle. Narcissists don't operate with real power. They operate through illusion. Their strength doesn't come from who they are, but from what they can convince others to believe. They weave confusion like a web, using charm as bait and manipulation as thread. And most people don't even know they're caught until They're drained, doubting themselves, disconnected from their own intuition. That's where the danger lies, not in what the narcissist does, but in what the empath doesn't yet understand. A narcissist thrives in the shadows of your unawareness. As long as you're questioning yourself, they're winning. As long as you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, they're growing stronger. Because see, they don't need you to believe in them. They just need you not to believe in you. That's the game. They gain power by making you feel small, by making you second guess your instincts, by making you explain your boundaries like they're a burden. And every time you try to prove your love to someone who never had the capacity to receive it, you give up a piece of yourself. That's the currency they trade in. But a super empath changes the dynamic not by force, but by awakening. The moment you start asking the right questions, the spell breaks. The moment you stop blaming yourself for their behavior and start seeing patterns for what they are, the fog lifts. You begin to realize that the confusion was never a coincidence. It was a strategy. It was always meant to keep you busy trying to fix things that were never yours to fix. And here's what hits different. The narcissist doesn't fear confrontation. They fear clarity. They fear your understanding, because once you understand who they are and how they operate, they lose control. They no longer get to write the story, you do. And when you start writing it from a place of wisdom, instead of wounds, you become unpredictable, you become free. It's easy to look back and wonder how you didn't see it sooner, but don't waste time and regret. Your awakening didn't come late. It came right on time, because now you're not just someone who survived manipulation, you're someone who sees through it. And that sight, that's dangerous to the narcissist, because what they need is your blindness. What they need is your silence. What they need is your ongoing participation in their performance. But once you stop playing along, the show can't go on. See, the super empath doesn't just feel, they discern. They've been through enough to know what real love looks like. They've cried enough to know what peace should feel like. They've endured enough confusion to know the taste of truth when it finally shows up. And when you reach that level of awareness, you start reacting to narcissists and you start removing them. Not out of bitterness, but out of alignment. Because now you know love isn't supposed to hurt like that. Connection isn't supposed to cost your identity. And relationships aren't supposed to feel like war zones you call home. That kind of clarity isn't just insight, it's power. It's the kind of power that dismantles false authority, the kind that puts narcissists in check without ever raising your voice. Just your standard, just your energy. And when that shift happens, the narcissist begins to fade. Not because you exposed them to the world, but because you stopped hiding the truth from yourself. You stopped engaging, you stopped apologizing for your intuition. You started listening to your soul instead of their stories. And without your confusion to feed on, they starve. That's the moment everything changes. That's when the narcissist's reign ends, not with a fight, but with an awakening. And that awakening begins the moment you remember who you are. The most dangerous thing to a narcissist is not anger, not revenge, not confrontation. It's truth. Simple, unshakable, undeniable truth. Because truth doesn't bend to perception. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. And when a super empath speaks the truth, not from a place of rage, but from clarity, that's when the narcissist begins to lose control. Because their entire identity is built on the illusion of control, and truth tears through illusion like light breaks through darkness. See, narcissists are masters of the mask. They know how to shift, how to shape, how to show you exactly what you want to see until you forget what you look like. They twist your words, make you question your own memories, and rewrite the story in their favor. Not because it's real, but because it's useful. That's how they survive, through narratives that protect their ego. But a super empath, they don't need to argue. They don't need to expose the narcissist to the crowd. They just need to see them clearly. And once they do, the game is over. Because clarity dismantles confusion. And once the fog is gone, you don't fall for the charm. You don't explain your boundaries. You don't entertain the drama. You don't beg to be understood. You simply know. And that knowing, that's truth in motion. That's what makes you powerful, because the narcissist was never feeding off your love. They were feeding off your uncertainty. That's what gave them space to maneuver. That's what allowed them to paint your empathy as overreaction, your intuition as paranoia, your kindness as weakness. But the moment you stop asking, is it me, and start stating, this is what I see, the dynamic flips. Now they're the ones on shaky ground. Now they're the ones unsure of how to navigate, because they're not used to being seen, not fully. They're used to performing. And when the audience stops clapping, not because they're angry, but because they've woken up, the show starts to collapse. That's the quiet justice. That's the real destruction. And it doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can happen in a single moment of stillness, where you look at the situation and say, I see what this is, and I'm not playing anymore. That right there is where your power lives, in your refusal to carry what doesn't belong to you, in your decision to stop arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you, in your ability to stand firm, not to prove a point, but to honor your peace. Because a narcissist can only control what you don't understand. The moment you understand the pattern, the manipulation becomes obvious, the tactics become predictable, and their power begins to shrink. That's why they fear your healing. That's why they push harder when you pull away, because they know what's coming. They know that once you see them without the mask, you'll never unsee it. You'll never forget the way truth felt in your body when the lie finally cracked. And you won't need revenge. You won't need to convince anyone. You'll just walk differently, speak differently, move with intention. Because when you carry truth, you carry authority. And in the presence of that kind of truth, the narcissist has no defense. They can't argue with someone who's not playing. They can't manipulate someone who's not confused. They can't control someone that's the moment they lose, and they know it. Because light doesn't fight darkness, it reveals it. And once the truth is revealed, the illusion collapses. Not because you forced it down, but because you finally stood up. Most people think love is saying yes. They think love is being available, being patient, being understanding, no matter what. But the truth is, real love isn't found in how much you tolerate. It's found in how well you protect what's sacred. And boundaries are love in action. They're not a wall to keep people out. They're a gate to protect what matters. And a super empath knows this deep in their spirit. See, when you're deeply empathetic, your first instinct is to connect, to help, to heal. You feel things before they're said. You see pain in someone's eyes and your heart moves. That's your gift. But that gift becomes a curse the moment it's unguarded. That's why narcissists are drawn to empaths, not because the empath is weak, but because they're open, accessible, willing to stretch themselves to ease someone else's discomfort. And the narcissist, they take full advantage of that. They test limits. They push. They prod. And they praise you when you bend, only to punish you when you break. But a super empath learns something crucial. Love without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. You cannot keep giving and expect someone who thrives on taking to one day start giving back. That's not how narcissists operate. They see it as access. And every time you stay silent to keep the peace, every time you forgive without change, every time you accept their behavior just to avoid conflict, you're not avoiding war. You're surrendering territory. That's where boundaries come in, not as a punishment, but as a declaration. I matter too. A super empath doesn't set boundaries to push people away. They set them to honor their own soul. And that right there is what terrifies the narcissist. Because boundaries disrupt their control loop. Boundaries say, you can't speak to me like that. Boundaries say, if you choose disrespect, you lose access. That kind of power isn't loud, but it's unmistakable. And here's the thing, narcissists don't respect love that comes without limits. They may be drawn to it, but they don't respect. What stops them in their tracks is consequence, not threats, not drama, just quiet, consistent consequence. The kind that says, this is my line, and if you cross it, I'll walk away without a speech. That's where the super empath breaks the pattern. Not by trying to make the narcissist understand, but by refusing to keep explaining. Because at some point, you realize that anyone who truly loves you won't require you to harm yourself to stay connected. They won't demand silence when you need to speak. They won't treat your boundaries like a personal attack. And when you stop defending your right to peace, everything shifts. You stop apologizing for outgrowing people who were never willing to grow. You stop making space for people who only show up when they need something. You start choosing yourself not out of selfishness, but out of stewardship. And the narcissist, they can't handle that. They can't manipulate someone who says no more. They can't guilt trip someone who's done explaining. They can't gaslight someone who trusts their own voice. That's when the power flips, not through confrontation, but through alignment. You start walking in truth. You start speaking with clarity. You stop negotiating your worth. And the moment that happens, the narcissist becomes irrelevant. Not because you destroyed them, but because you stopped giving them a seat at your table. That's the power of boundaries. That's the wisdom of the super empath. They love deeply, but they no longer love blindly. They know their peace is too expensive to rent out to chaos. And when that kind of love walks into the room, everything changes. Not with force, with presence, with standard, with unwavering, graceful strength. There's a misconception in this world that compassion means tolerance without limits, that to be loving is to endlessly forgive, endlessly explain, endlessly hold space, even when it's hurting you. But that's not compassion. That's captivity. And a super empath learns that lesson the hard way. They learn that true compassion doesn't mean losing yourself to save someone who's already decided they don't want to be saved. It means knowing when to stop giving what someone is committed to wasting. A narcissist doesn't respond to your compassion with gratitude. They respond with exploitation. They see your empathy, your mercy, your softness, and they twist it. They use it as leverage, as access, as an opportunity to continue a cycle that only benefits them. And you keep showing up. You keep hoping that your love will reach them, that your presence will change them. But the hard truth is, someone who refuses to face their own reflection will always use your light to avoid their shadows. The super empath wakes up to this, not all at once, but gradually, after enough betrayals dressed as apologies, after enough silent treatments, after enough moments where you realize you're the only one fighting for the relationship. You start to see that compassion doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. It means having enough love for yourself to walk away. Not in hate, not in anger, but in power. See, this is what separates the super empath from the wounded empath. The super empath doesn't try to destroy the narcissist. They destroy the attachment. That invisible thread that keeps pulling you back, keeps making you second guess what you know in your spirit, keeps making you shrink so someone else can feel secure. That's the real chain. That's the real freedom. And you don't do it by becoming cold. You don't do it by hardening your heart. You do it by rising. You rise in your identity. You rise in your purpose. You stop trying to make them see your value, and you start living like you already know it. You stop pouring into empty vessels. You stop sacrificing your well-being to prove you're worthy. Because the moment you realize you were never the problem, you were just the mirror, that's when you stop chasing validation and start walking in authority. That's the paradox that ends the narcissist's grip. Your compassion doesn't end, but it's no longer for them. It's redirected toward your healing, toward your peace, toward people who recognize your value without needing to be convinced. And the narcissist, they don't know what to do with that. because their game depends on you being broken enough to stay. But when your compassion becomes wise, when it's become strategic, when it's backed by boundaries, they can't use it anymore. You're not trying to fix them anymore. You're not trying to make them feel something they're incapable of. You're no longer pleading with someone who only hears their own echo. You're walking forward, not with bitterness, not with vengeance, but with a grace that says, I release you and I reclaim me. And that kind of movement, that's where the destruction happens. Quiet, unannounced, permanent. Because the narcissist wasn't expecting you to rise, they were expecting you to break. But when you chose healing over proving, when you chose silence over reaction, when you chose yourself over the cycle, that's when the mask slipped. And all you did was refuse to fall. That's the strength of a super empath. They don't destroy the narcissist by becoming cruel. They destroy them by becoming free. There comes a moment, after all the pain, the confusion, the inner war, when the super empath doesn't just survive the narcissist, they transcend them. That's the final move. The narcissist never expected you to outgrow the cycle. They counted on your wounds, your loyalty, your hope. They thought you'd stay stuck trying to understand them while ignoring yourself. But when the super empath finally chooses themselves, not out of bitterness, but out of evolution, the game is over. And make no mistake, this kind of evolution isn't about getting louder. It's not about revenge. It's not even about calling them out. It's about leveling up so far that they can no longer reach you. Their words can't shake you. Their presence doesn't pull at you. Their silence doesn't confuse you. You've changed frequency. You're no longer dancing to the rhythm of manipulation. You're walking in your own divine timing to a song only your healed self can hear. That kind of growth is power, the kind that doesn't announce itself but is undeniable, and the narcissist feels it. Not because you're trying to hurt them, but because they're losing something they never owned, your energy. That's what they fed off of. That's what they needed. Not just your attention, but your emotional reaction, your confusion, your desire to be understood, your effort to keep the peace. And when all of that stops, when you just let go, you become untouchable. The narcissist thrives on unfinished business, on open wounds, on doors that are slightly ajar. But healing is the lock. Evolution is the closure. When the super empath heals, truly heals, they stop revisiting the past, they stop rehearsing the pain, they stop giving the narcissist free rent in their mind, not because they forgot, but because they finally understand who they were, who the narcissist is, and who they are now. And who they are now, unrecognizable to the person who was once addicted to chaos, to people-pleasing, to the high of momentary validation. The healed empath becomes the version of themselves the narcissist never wanted to meet. Confident, centered, calm, no longer emotionally entangled, no longer looking back, just moving forward with purpose, with clarity, and with a deeper love for themselves than they ever thought possible. That's the real win. Not that the narcissist is destroyed, but that they're no longer relevant, that they can't touch what they used to manipulate, that their absence no longer creates a hole because the super empath has filled it with self-worth, wisdom, and a new vision for their life. That's the kind of growth that doesn't just close a chapter, it burns the old script and starts writing a new story entirely. And in that new story, there's peace, there's alignment, there's authenticity. The super empath no longer needs to explain themselves. They no longer need to prove their value. They embody it, they live it, and they attract a new level of connection, one rooted in reciprocity, respect, and resonance. So if you're on the journey, if you're still somewhere between the pain and the breakthrough, know this. The day you choose to evolve instead of engage, you've already won. You don't have to fight them. You just have to free yourself, because when you do, you become the one thing a narcissist can never control, whole. And that wholeness, That's the final move. That's the exit they never saw coming. That's the quiet revolution. The healed empath doesn't just escape the narcissist, they transcend them. And in doing so, they turn their pain into power, their wounds into wisdom, and their story into strength.